guys, welcome back to Room 237, and I guess I figured it'd be now or never to talk about this film. This is something I picked up some time ago, towards the end of my last Italian Giallo marathon. Around the same time I picked this up. Now, I've already talked about Marian Dora's first film, 2006's Cannibal, which is up there as one of the most extreme, controversial horror films. I've said before, when it comes to extreme filmmakers, you sort of have like three tiers. You kind of have like your Darren Aronofsky's, then and I don't know who else, or Rob Zombie, I guess. But then you have like your Lars von Trier and your Gaspar Noé, and then you have like your Marian Dora and Fred Vogel and Lucifer Valentine. So yeah, this is among the more extreme and effective. I actually thought this was an effective extreme horror film. But around the same time, I picked up his 2009 follow-up, which is widely considered to be, in the world of extreme horror, the most sick, twisted, depraved, controversial, wildly shocking, disturbing, whatever adjective you want to give it. Supposedly, this is up there as the most, even more than Serbian Film or August Underground Mortem. And it is his 2009 film, Melancholy Der Engel, or The Angel's Melancholy. And yes, this is the, I think it was called Shock Entertainment put this out. But the limited to 1,000 slipcase edition, which I bought off eBay, mine's number 0031, so among the first 100. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, for the longest time, and I mean, I've been wanting to see this as a curiosity since probably 2012. But for the longest time, the only real way you could see it was, there was an American-friendly version, but I believe that was heavily cut. If you wanted to see it uncut, like, and uncensored, the only way to get it was a very elusive German DVD with no English subtitles. And it's been debated on whether you even need the subtitles, like whether the dialogue and voiceover narration even matters, which I'll get into. So yeah, as of now, this is the most definitive way to watch this film. It is the uncut director's edition, which does run long, 164 minutes. That's about almost 3 hours. That's what, 2 hours 44 minutes, and its length is a chore, I will say that. So, directed by Marian Dora, written by both Dora and Frank Oliver, whose real name is Karsten Frank, but he went by, I think he went by Frank Oliver. Yeah, Frank Oliver, because of artistic disagreements, which is weird because he was the lead in this as Frank Oliver as well. And as far as the cast go, I don't really think it matters. He's the only one that I recognized. But, and last night was not the first time I've seen this. I did see it back when I watched and reviewed Cannibal, but because it was so long and I kind of watched it over like a broken up period, last night I did watch it in one sitting in its entirety. I really didn't know what to make of this film. I still kind of don't. I've watched and read a few reviews, and it's all pretty much the same that I'm going to say. Yeah, stars Zenza Raji, Karsten Frank or Frank Oliver, Jeanette Weller, Bianca Schneider, Patrizia Johann, Peter Martell, and Marguerite von Stern. With also edited by, the cinematography was all by Mary Dora. I really don't know where to begin with this. Yes, I will say probably just as far as shocking material and shock value stuff, this probably does have the most and the most extreme. But as far as impactful or meaningful or having any kind of substance, I don't really think it does. It really is just a nearly 3-hour endurance test of depravity and nihilism. I really don't think the dialogue and voiceover really means anything. It's trying to be deep and poetic, and it sounds very pseudo-intellectual and very pretentious. But it doesn't really sound or feel like it's building towards anything. It just sounds like a bunch of short ideas, or like short nihilistic musings of life. And I mean, the story essentially is you have this guy named Katza, played by Frank Oliver. He's dying, or he gets the idea that he's dying or will die, so he meets up with an old friend of his named Brouth, who looks like a mixture of Manson and Jesus. But I think he's supposed to be like a David Hess type character. He's got like the same shaggy David Hess hair. He is the most depraved one in the film. He's actually kind of who this one's supposed to be. They decide to go to this old country house where actually the film opens up with, and I do want to say, warning right here, because I'm just going to go ahead and say what shocking things are in this. Spoilers and everything. Right off the bat, yes, there is a lot of animal cruelty in this. This is one of the things that sparked a lot of controversy, both authentic and simulated. The slaughter of a pig is authentic. There is a very notorious scene with a cat, like a house cat, which it's gone back and forth on whether that was real or not. I think Dora himself has come out to say that was fake, but the head of U.S. distribution says Dora told him personally that it was real. So take with it what you will. I mean, it is very real looking, but I'm going to kind of take the director's word for it that it was fake. Some salamanders get squished, a lot of snails and crickets. I think a lot of the rabbits and birds that appear are already dead, but their carcasses kind of get mutilated. There is a lot of different forms of rape. There is a lot of real shitting, pissing, vomiting. This is a movie that does push it to the furthest extremes of what's extreme and what's shocking. But is it effective? Or is it just shock value? So keep in mind, that's what I'm going to be talking about, because there really is no plot. Other than Katza and Broth getting together to go out to this country home where they meet up every so often to have these excursions of just depravity and debauchery and dark pleasures. Also, there's a lot of religious, anti-religious imagery as well. They find these two 16-year-old girls at a carnival. They coerce them to come with them. They meet this one gothy or dominatrix type woman at a bar. She comes along. Then this old friend of theirs, Heinrich, shows up with a young woman named Clarissa who's confined to a wheelchair and has a colostomy bag. And yes, the colostomy bag does come into play. They all go out to this country home for a weekend of just the most depraved acts that you can think of. And really, one way I've seen this film described is a series of vignettes. And that is how it feels. Because, I mean, every time there's, like, a shock scene, it almost feels like it resets. Like, no one seems to be upset by or appalled or... Like, even the two 16-year-old girls, Bianca and Melanie. Something bad happens to one of them. The friend isn't concerned, and then the next scene, they're both fine with the whole group. So it almost just feels like it resets. Like, it's very episodic, almost. All the way up until there's only a few of them left, and then Katz dies, and that's the end of the movie. And, like, Katz does provide the voiceover narration where, again, it's just a lot of poetic, pseudo-intellectual musings about nihilism and life is pain, life is suffering, we're all insignificant, so what's the point? Let's just... Also, the way Broth talks about, you know, like, you must not... something through virtue, but virtue itself. And a lot of really pretentious shit like that. And this is coming from someone who really likes both longer films. A lot of my favorite movies are lengthier. Even my favorite movie of the 21st century and what I think the greatest film of the 21st century, There Will Be Blood. And it's pretty much the same runtime. Also, films that are considered pretentious. I mean, I love the films by A24. I love Possum. I really like House That Jack Built and Antichrist by Lars von Trier. So I like the more pretentious or artsy horror films. And I have said before that a Serbian film has a metaphor, but it doesn't live up to it. It's just a bunch of shock scenes, a bunch of just edgelord shock scenes. One, after watching a lot of art films that do tell their story through metaphor, and then after watching this, I will say a Serbian film does have its shock scenes apply to the story and the metaphor better than this does. This really is just a series of shock scenes. The only thing that keeps it going really would be the cinematography. I mean, it is shot really well. It does have that very low budget, almost found footage look to it, like almost this hazy, low budget look to it that Cannibal had. Which, before I saw this and before I saw Cannibal, even people that hated this film talked about the cinematography and how well it was shot. So I actually thought I was going into a film that looked like Lars von Trier's Antichrist, which deals with a couple going out to their cabin out in the country, and then shit gets weird. So I was actually kind of thinking and hoping it was going to look more like Antichrist. But the way it's filmed, it does give it a sense of atmosphere, this sort of otherworldly look and feel to it that can kind of pull you along. It's what pulled me along, at least. But it really, of all the shock scenes, I mean, it does take a while to get to each one. I mean, there's very long stretches of nothing. I mean, even when I was watching it last night, after Heinrich and the wheelchair girl show up, they're all sitting, like, laying in a circle in like, the main room with, like, a hookah. And the camera's just all these up-close, weird angles of everyone. And I found it kind of entrancing. I kind of found myself being hypnotized. But then there's other scenes, like... There's one scene where everyone is walking off in different directions, going up to this one area where there's, like, a church and a slaughterhouse. And that goes on for, like, 45 minutes of just people walking or what they do when they get there. And a lot of some of the shock scenes are very edgelordy. I mean, and there is a lot of juxtaposition going on. I mean, whenever there's these really long, torturous shock scenes, there's like church organ in the background. There's usually 3 or 4 things going on at the same time, just interwoven together. Like, the first one is we see this nun at a church who... We see her, we see the slaughter of a pig, in which a Melanie helps. Broth rapes Anya, the goth chick. And Kotz tries to get into, like, a glass top casket with a mummified corpse inside. All those are going on at the same time. And yes, the nun in the church does strip and then kind of start to pleasure herself on the altar. And it does have this very edgelord feel to it, like a high school kid that's really just trying to piss off religious people. Like, there's not much to it other than that. But some of it is timed very well, because, like, once the pig is slaughtered and it's hung up, they're, like, taking a cleaver to it down the middle till it splits. When it finally splits is when Broth climaxes, as does the nun. Kotz finishes whatever he's doing. But it does go at sort of a methodical pace. I mean, it does... Each debaucherous act does get more and more extreme. Because, I mean, after that, we have the next big scene, which would be the girl in the wheelchairs complaining about something. So Broth brings her down to, like, the cellar, throws her off her wheelchair, rips her colostomy bag off. And I will say, the actress did a good job. Because everything he does to her, her blood-curdling scream, you really feel the pain of what he's doing to her. So, like, he rips her colostomy bag off, then he just, like, does that. And it shows it. Which, yeah, there's a lot of both male and female up-close genitalia, aroused and not aroused in this. Along with pissing and shitting, that's very real. Some of it makes sense. I mean, like, there's a scene where Kotz is stricken with a seizure. So he's flopping around and we see him piss himself with no pants. I say, okay, that makes sense. But then there's a scene where Anya is holding a glass and we see the piss come out and then she drinks it. Like, and I will say, for me personally, that's the grossest. All the toilet type stuff. As far as, like, the assault and the torture, the only thing that was really different that can make it stand out would be the one with the colostomy bag. Bianca is kind of like the Snow White. They call her Snow White, I'm guessing because she kind of represents purity or whatever. They all gang up on her. By they, I mean Kotz, Broth, Heinrich, and Anya. They all kick and beat the hell out of her, sexually assault her with a knife until her womb comes out, and then she crawls away, and I don't even remember how she dies. which when that scene's going on, and this is what I mean by like everything kind of resets. Because Anya is raped by Broth during like the church scene, but then the rest of the movie, she seems to be in love with Kotz throughout the whole film. But like she talks to Broth normally. Melody seems to be very receptive of everything that's going on, to the point where either she doesn't really seem to care that things are happening to Bianca. And while she's getting the torture of her life and being killed outside, Melanie she goes to this clock where she finds a little tiny skull and a videotape. Now, the opening of the film shows a pregnant woman being tied up, giving birth, and I don't remember how much it shows, but it cuts, and she puts the videotape in, and she's watching this tape as Bianca's getting her torture outside. That shows a pregnant woman with the fetus being pulled out of her, beheaded, disemboweled. She gets disemboweled, and Melanie goes back and forth between being disturbed and almost getting sick. Excuse me, and then taking the tape out, ripping all the tape out, and then masturbating with it. It really doesn't. Like, it really makes everyone kind of look guilty of some sort of debauchery or depravity, save for Bianca and Clarissa, the girl in the wheelchair, which Heinrich goes to abuse her, which he does. He hits her with a bunch of things. And then the next day he wheels her to a cliff, walks off, stands back too. We just see her stand up and fall off the cliff and kill herself. Which it shows other skeletons down there too, so I guess that's just what Heinrich does. And Heinrich was the one that, the other very notorious scene, force feeds a cat some poison, then slits its throat. And again, it could be real. Dora has said that it was fake. I'm taking his word for it, but it is very effective looking. As far as stuff around the cabin, I mean, there's a lot of busted up dolls, like baby dolls, bones and carcasses of animals, and all kinds of stuff. I've heard people say that, oh, it's to show nature, and everything in life is just as disposable and as insignificant as the other. I think it just gives it sort of a dingy Chainsaw Massacre type look to it, just like a dilapidated country house. Which they also say Heinrich is like an artist who does weird shit like that. Other people have said, based on dialogue, that, Kotz, he's capable of depravity, but he has a heart of gold. He does seem more submissive and kinder, but he still does do some awful stuff in this. That, like, Heinrich, he's dead but his body is still on Earth, and he's completely miserable about it. Again, more of the pseudo-intellectual, really pretentious, nihilistic stuff. And it does seem like Melanie begins a fascination for Heinrich. So at one point, Broth ties Bianca and Melanie together and brings them out to the barn and leaves them so Heinrich can do whatever he wants to them. But they're able to escape. And because of that, that's when he goes and abuses Clarissa until she commits suicide. And then basically the final act, there seems to be like three major moments. There's like the one with the church and the slaughterhouse. the one with Bianca being tortured and killed, and the videotape, and then the final one where Broth and Kotz uh, disembowel Heinrich, and then while he's still alive, they throw him on this pyre. Then they burn it with him still alive, and then they all piss and shit and have an orgy while he's screaming in pain. Which there's another point where Anya gets, I don't remember what she gets aroused by, but she lets a goat eat her out. So there's that as well. So there's bestiality too. But then something shoots out of the fire, which blinds Kotz. And then for the end of the film, which I think is supposed to be like sad, there is, when it's not this gothic church organ playing during all the shock scenes, it is this very heavenly, beautiful, soft music that's almost kind of sad. But like Anya leads Kotz to where he wants to be buried. He dies, she buries him, and he seems to decompose fast. Because during his burial, like, he goes to complete white. Like, even his little jigsaw soul patch here. Which might go into one theory that I've heard about this film, which is that Kotz, Broth, and maybe Heinrich were angels that were put on Earth. And then, like, when their time is up, they're just trying to feel all of life's pain and pleasure and everything that they don't get to feel as angels before it's too late. That's one thing I've heard about this film. I guess that's one way to interpret it. Another way is that they're just severely messed up individuals. Which, they're like, right as he's dying, we get like a little flashback to where we see him out in the woods. He masturbates. He reads a book where he has a dead mouse as a bookmark. He rolls over all these rocks with Broth. Him and Broth are naked, rolling over all these rocks and getting cut up. And then as she's burying him, we see her squat and piss all over his corpse. And then she just walks off with the nun from earlier. End of the movie. Which, while that's going on, we see Broth laying on the floor with a Melanie, who is just suffering a complete breakdown. So it seems like all the events of the weekend are coming back to her. And she's just suffering a mental breakdown. But that's pretty much the movie. And I mean, there's other parts, like, we see a part where Anya is, well, in the sort of the beginning when they first get there, we see her blowing Kotz. And then we see her pull her shirt down. She lets Kotz cut her chest up with a scalpel, and she vomits semen all over herself, which makes other people uncomfortable. Another part where we see her in this room suspended in like this S&M barbed wire wrap where we see her just vomiting a bunch. Or a scene where she tries to make Kotz feel better and then he just gets up, literally sprays diarrhea all over her, and then goes out in the main room and tries to assault Bianca somehow. Like, he takes her underwear, does like the butt floss thing, gets it covered in shit, and then he shoves it in the underwear in her mouth and tries to get her to finger him. And I think that's what leads to them being tied together and let us. I can't even remember the exact order of like the smaller parts, but there really are three main events. There's, again, the whole church with the slaughterhouse and Broth assaulting Anya. There's Bianca being beaten assaulted with a knife and killed while Melanie watches the tape. And then when Heinrich is killed and burnt towards the end, and then we get the wrap up with Katz's death and burial. And for the most part, in between those, you do just get long periods of just that attempt at being poetic, pseudo intellectual, pretentious dialogue about philosophy and nihilism. And I mean, okay, so half hour in, do I find this movie effective? Not. I mean, there's things in it that are gross for sure. For me, the grossest parts were the piss and the shit, which is the reason why I'm not the biggest fan of the Lucifer Valentine films. As far as the actual violent scenes, the colostomy bag was pretty horrific. But I think the actress is really what sold that. The whole scene with Bianca getting the knife in her and then her womb being taken out. Other than that, though, the scene with the nun pleasuring herself on the altar, or a Melanie using the VHS tape that had all the baby stuff on it, using that to pleasure herself along with her period blood. It came across just as, more edgelord, like like the kind of high school kid that's been given the okay to just piss off whoever you want. And that's what he thinks will shock people. Other than that, I don't think there's really a point to it. Do I think it's more disturbing, shocking, and whatever else than, say, a Serbian film or August Underground or Sallow? Which one? I'll say Sallow is still a much better movie. As far as... which I actually have it right here. As far as all your typical shocking, disturbing films, I will say the one that is still the most shocking and the most effective while still being an effective film is still Sallow. I still think this is much better than both of these. I think it's better than a Serbian film, August Underground. I think August Underground is only effective because it has that visual gimmick of looking like a snuff film. But this kind of does suffer from what Serbian film does, which is a lot of it just feels like edgelord shock stuff. I will say Serbian film does have more of a clear message as to what it's about, even if it is through a metaphor. This does not. And plus, just keep burping. While it does feel just like a series of vignettes, it really does just feel like a visual shocks. Like all these separate images or like a compilation of things to shock you. It doesn't really have that through line narrative other than Kotz dying and then finally being dead. And yeah, its pacing in its runtime was a chore. But if you are going to see it, you might as well. And it probably is expensive. I mean, I paid a pretty penny for this, but it does come with like an hour-long documentary on called Revisiting a Melancholy Der Engel, which is where the guy meets up with Mary Dora. It's a documentary about talking about it. It does come with five shorts by Dora, 5 of his short films. So this is the definitive way to get it, if you can find it. And yeah, other than like its cinematography, I will say it does have atmosphere. It does have this good otherworldly atmosphere to it. It does kind of have this sense of dread, but it's really not clear what anyone's motivations are or why the girlfriends don't really react when the other one is being attacked or hurt, or why they're not trying to escape. And yeah, I don't think there really is any other deep meaning than these two long friends that share a past of doing terrible things to other people at this country house, which they keep referring to it as the house where it all began, which I think they keep referring to, that the birth giving scene. And when Kotz is dying, they decide to give him a weekend where he goes out with a bang. Uh, uh. I think really that's the deepest meaning to it. All the poetic nihilism and everything is just it trying to seem deeper than it really is. But yeah, I can see why it's ranked amongst or even tops the list of the most disturbing, shocking, gross out, controversial films, because as far as quantity, yeah, it does have a lot of stuff in it. It even has baby stuff in it, which Serbian Film has as well. Personally, I just don't think it doesn't have that ratio of shocking, disturbing, uncomfort, unbeing, while also being, effective, having it work, and being, a watchable, good movie like this is. I actually think Sallow's a well-made movie. But anyway, I'm just going to keep repeating myself. So now I have seen and talked about what is known to be the worst of the worst, the most extreme of extreme, the most shocking of the shocking, Marian Dora's Melancholy Der Engel, or The Angel's Melancholy. So there it is, and thank you for watching.